The blood on her hands was not her own, and that terrified her more than anything else that had happened in the last 3 days. Caroline Mitchell stumbled through the New Mexico darkness, her boots catching on sagebrush and loose rocks as she pushed herself forward. It was August 1883, and the desert air still held the day's heat even though the sun had set hours ago. She had been running since leaving the stagecoach wreckage, running from the men who had attacked it, running from the memory of the driver's face as he fell. Her lungs burned, her throat ached from thirst, and her vision blurred with exhaustion. When she finally saw the flicker of a campfire in the distance, she nearly wept with relief. Caroline had no choice but to approach. She had no water, no food, and no idea where she was. The alternative was dying alone in the wilderness, and despite everything that had happened, she was not ready to give up. As she drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a single man sitting by the fire, his hat pulled low. A horse stood nearby, and she could see the outline of a saddle and bedroll. Please let him be decent, she prayed silently. Please let him be kind. She must have made a noise because the man's head snapped up and his hand went immediately to the gun at his hip. Caroline froze, raising her trembling hands in the air. Please, she managed to croak out. I need help. The cowboy stood slowly, his hand still on his weapon. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that blocked some of the firelight. Come into the light where I can see you, he said, his voice low and cautious. Caroline took several shaky steps forward until the firelight illuminated her face and torn dress. She knew she must look like a nightmare, covered in dust and blood, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. The cowboy's stance relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary. What happened to you? He asked. Stagecoach, Caroline whispered. Attacked, I ran. Her legs chose that moment to give out and she collapsed onto the hard ground. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the cowboy rushing forward, his face etched with concern. When Caroline woke, she was lying on a bedroll near the fire, a saddle blanket tucked around her. The sky above was still dark, though the stars had shifted positions. The cowboy sat across the fire from her, watching her with an unreadable expression. He had sharp features, she noticed now, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to catch the firelight. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years. Easy, he said when she tried to sit up. You have been out for about an hour. I cleaned the blood off your hands. It was not yours, I am guessing. Caroline shook her head, fighting back tears. The driver, he tried to protect us. There were 4 men masked. They shot him in the guard. The other passengers ran in different directions. I just kept running. The cowboy nodded slowly. I am Josiah Webb. I work cattle drives heading back to my family's ranch outside Santa Fe. You are safe now. He poured water from a canteen into a tin cup and brought it to her. Drink slowly. Caroline took the cup with shaking hands and sipped gratefully. Caroline Mitchell. I was traveling from St. Louis to meet my aunt in Santa Fe. She runs a boarding house there. She paused, then added, Thank you for not shooting me. A ghost of a smile crossed Josiah's face. I do not make a habit of shooting terrified women who stumble into my camp. He returned to his side of the fire and picked up a plate of beans and hardtack. I saved you some supper. It is not much, but you need to eat. As Caroline ate, Josiah explained that they were about 2 days' ride from Santa Fe if they took their time. He offered to escort her there, an offer she accepted immediately. We will head out at first light, he said. You can rest until then. I will keep watch. You need to sleep too, Caroline protested, but Josiah shook his head. I will sleep better knowing those men are not tracking you. Rest, Miss Mitchell. Caroline wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She lay back down on the bedroll, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The fire crackled softly, and she could hear Josiah moving around the camp, checking on his horse and arranging his supplies. Despite everything that had happened, she felt safe. There was something solid and dependable about this cowboy, something that made her trust him instinctively. As sleep began to pull her under, Caroline's mind drifted to thoughts of her journey. of the life she had left behind in St. Louis after her parents died of fever. Her aunt was her only living relative, and Santa Fe represented a fresh start. She thought about the stagecoach attack, the terror, the blood. And then, inexplicably, her thoughts turned to the man sitting across the fire, to his steady presence and kind eyes. "Josiah," she murmured, his name slipping from her lips as she fell into dreams. Across the fire, Josiah's head jerked up at the sound of his name. He stared at Caroline's sleeping form, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the way the firelight played across her features. She had whispered his name in her sleep, soft and almost tender. Something shifted in his chest, a feeling he could not quite name. He had been alone for so long, focused on work and survival, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to matter to someone. Josiah stood and walked quietly to where Caroline slept. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, then added another log to the fire to keep her warm through the night. As he settled back down to keep watch, he made himself a silent promise. He would get this woman safely to Santa Fe. He would protect her from whatever dangers lay ahead. And maybe, if he was lucky, he would find a way to make her whisper his name like that again. The next morning arrived with the pink and gold light of dawn spreading across the desert. Caroline woke to find Josiah crouched by the fire, frying salt pork in a small pan. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and she realized with a pang of guilt that he must have stayed awake all night. "You should have woken me," she said, sitting up. "I could have kept watch while you slept." Josiah glanced at her, then returned his attention to the pan. "You needed the rest more than I did. Besides, I have gone longer without sleep during cattle drives." He divided the salt pork onto 2 tin plates and handed her one along with some hardtack. "We need to eat and move. I want to put distance between us and wherever those bandits might be." They ate quickly, and Josiah showed Caroline how to pack up the camp efficiently. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Ranger, stood patiently as Josiah secured their supplies. The problem was that they only had one horse between them. "You will ride," Josiah said firmly when Caroline started to protest. "I will walk alongside and lead Ranger. We will make better time that way than if we both walk." "That is not fair to you," Caroline argued. "We could take turns. Miss Mitchell, you have been through an ordeal." "I am used to hard travel. This is not up for discussion." His tone was gentle but final. Caroline found herself smiling despite the situation. "You are very stubborn, Mr. Webb." "Josiah," he corrected, helping her up into the saddle. "If we are going to be traveling together, we might as well use first names." "Then you must call me Caroline." Josiah's hand lingered for a moment on her ankle, steadying her before he stepped back. "Caroline it is." They set out across the desert, following a trail that Josiah knew would eventually connect with the main road to Santa Fe. The morning air was cool but would turn hot within a few hours. Josiah walked with an easy, ground-eating stride, one hand on Ranger's reins. He pointed out landmarks and told Caroline stories about the territory, clearly trying to distract her from dwelling on the attack. "I grew up on the ranch," Josiah explained as they walked. "My father started it with nothing but determination and a small herd. Now we run about 500 head of cattle. My older brother Daniel manages most of the operations while I handle the drives and buying stock. Our younger sister Emma lives in town but visits often." "It sounds like a good life," Caroline said wistfully. "I grew up in the city. My father was a clerk, my mother a seamstress. Everything was crowded and noisy. I used to dream about wide open spaces." "The open spaces have their own challenges," Josiah said. "Drought, harsh winters, isolation, but I would not trade it for anything." He looked up at her, squinting against the sun. "What will you do in Santa Fe?" "Help my aunt run her boarding house, I suppose. I can cook and clean, manage accounts. I am good with numbers." Caroline paused, then added more quietly, "I need to start over. There is nothing left for me in St. Louis." Josiah heard the pain in her voice and made a decision. "Starting over takes courage. You have already proven you have plenty of that. Running away in terror counts as courage. Surviving does. They traveled in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds the crunch of boots and hooves on the rocky ground and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. Caroline found herself watching Josiah as he walked, noting the confident way he moved, the alertness in his eyes as he scanned their surroundings. She felt safer with him than she had felt in months, maybe years. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Josiah called a halt near a cluster of rocks that provided some shade. He helped Caroline down from the saddle, and she stumbled slightly, her legs stiff from riding. Josiah caught her elbow, steadying her, and for a moment they stood very close together. Caroline looked up into his eyes and felt her breath catch. There was something in the way he looked at her, something warm and protective that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," Josiah replied, then seemed to realize what he had said. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "We should rest here for a few hours, travel in the evening when it is cooler." They settled into the shade, sharing water and the last of the salt pork. Josiah fashioned a better sunshade using his bedroll and some branches, then insisted Caroline try to sleep. "I will wake you when it is time to move," he promised. Caroline did not think she would be able to sleep, but the heat and exhaustion caught up with her. She dozed fitfully, aware of Josiah's presence nearby, the sound of his breathing, the occasional movement as he checked on the horse or scanned the horizon. When she woke, the sun was lower in the sky, and Josiah was sitting with his back against a rock, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He looked like he might finally be sleeping. Caroline sat up quietly, not wanting to wake him. She studied his face, now relaxed in sleep, and felt a surge of affection that surprised her. She barely knew this man, yet he had shown her more kindness in one day than most people had shown her in months. He had stayed awake all night to protect her, walked for hours in the heat so she could ride, shared his limited supplies without complaint. What kind of man did that for a stranger? As if sensing her gaze, Josiah's eyes opened. For a moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Josiah sat up straight, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. "Ready to move on?" he asked, his voice slightly rough from sleep. Caroline nodded, and they prepared to continue their journey. This time, when Josiah helped her into the saddle, his hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Caroline found herself not wanting him to let go. As evening approached, they reached the main road to Santa Fe. Josiah's demeanor changed, becoming more alert and cautious. "We are more likely to encounter other travelers here," he explained. "Could be good people, could be trouble. Stay close." They had only been on the road for an hour when they spotted a small group of riders approaching from the opposite direction. Josiah tensed, his hand moving to his gun, but as they drew closer, he relaxed slightly. "Looks like a rancher and his hands," he said, "probably heading home from town." The riders turned out to be friendly, a weathered older man and 3 younger cowboys. They exchanged greetings and news of the road ahead. When the rancher heard about the stagecoach attack, his expression turned grim. "There has been a gang working this territory for the past month," he said. "4 men, you said. Sounds like the Garrett brothers and their cousins. Mean bunch. You were lucky to escape, miss." He looked at Josiah. "You taking her to Santa Fe?" "Yes, sir. Good man, be careful. That gang is still out there." The rancher tipped his hat to Caroline. "Safe travels to you both." After the riders moved on, Caroline felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "Do you think they will come after me? The gang, I mean." Josiah was quiet for a moment. "I doubt they even know you saw their faces, and even if they did, they have no idea where you went." He looked up at her, his expression serious. "But I will not let anything happen to you, Caroline, I promise you that." The conviction in his voice made Caroline's throat tight with emotion. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Josiah seemed to struggle for words. "Maybe I want to know you," he finally said. "Maybe when you stumbled into my camp looking terrified but still fighting, still surviving, I saw something worth protecting, something worth knowing better." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "I whispered your name last night," she admitted softly. In my sleep, did you hear me? Josiah's steps faltered for just a moment. I heard. I dreamed about you, about being safe. I have not felt safe in so long, Josiah. He stopped walking and turned to look at her fully, his hand on Ranger's neck. You are safe with me. I need you to believe that. I do, Caroline said, and she realized it was completely true. I do believe it. They made camp that night beside a small creek, the sound of running water providing a soothing backdrop. Josiah caught 2 rabbits with snares he set while Caroline gathered firewood. He showed her how to skin and prepare the meat, his hands patient and sure as he taught her. They roasted the rabbits over the fire and ate sitting side by side, their shoulders nearly touching. Tell me about your family, Caroline said, wanting to know everything about this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. Josiah smiled, his face softening. Daniel is 30, married to a good woman named Ruth. They have 2 little ones, a boy and a girl. Daniel is steady and practical, everything a rancher should be. Emma is 19, full of fire and opinions. She insists on living in town and working at the general store because she wants independence, drives our mother crazy. His expression grew more somber. My father died 2 years ago. Heart gave out during a roundup. My mother still lives on the ranch. She is strong, keeps us all in line. They sound wonderful, Caroline said. Do you think they would like me? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implication. Josiah turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the firelight. I think they would love you, but not as much as I am starting to. Caroline's breath caught. Josiah? I know it is too soon, he said quickly. I know we just met. But when I heard you whisper my name last night, something changed. I cannot explain it, Caroline. It was like my heart recognized you. Caroline reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. I feel it too. It terrifies me because I do not understand it, but I feel it. Josiah lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Then maybe we can be terrified together. They sat by the fire long into the night, talking about everything and nothing. Caroline told Josiah about growing up in St. Louis, about losing her parents, about the loneliness that had driven her to accept her aunt's invitation. Josiah shared stories about life on the ranch, about the beauty and brutality of the land, about the dreams he had for the future. With each word, each shared confidence, the connection between them deepened. When Caroline finally lay down to sleep, Josiah spread his own bedroll close to hers. So I can protect you better, he said, but they both knew it was more than that. Caroline fell asleep with Josiah's hand holding hers, their fingers intertwined. And this time, when she dreamed, it was not of fear or blood or running, but of a future she was just beginning to imagine. The next morning, they woke to find they had slept later than planned. The sun was already well up and the day promised to be hot. Josiah looked sheepish. I actually slept, he admitted. First time in 2 days. Because you felt safe too, Caroline said softly. Josiah nodded, then leaned over and kissed her forehead gently. We should reach Santa Fe by late afternoon if we make good time. The thought of reaching the city, of this journey ending, filled Caroline with conflicting emotions. She wanted to reach safety, to meet her aunt, to begin her new life. But she did not want to say goodbye to Josiah. The past 2 days had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. As they traveled the final stretch to Santa Fe, Josiah seemed quieter than usual, lost in his own thoughts. Finally, as the city came into view in the distance, he spoke. Caroline, I need to say something before we get there. What is it? Josiah stopped walking and looked up at her. I do not want this to end, us, I mean. These past 2 days with you have meant more to me than I know how to express. When we get to Santa Fe, I want permission to court you properly, to call on you to spend time with you to see where this goes. Caroline's heart swelled with joy. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. Josiah's face broke into a wide smile, and Caroline realized it was the first time she had seen him smile like that, unguarded and happy. He reached up and helped her down from the saddle, then pulled her into his arms. They stood there on the road to Santa Fe, holding each other, both of them trembling with emotion and possibility. "I was so afraid you would say we should forget about this," Josiah admitted, "that it was just the circumstances, the danger, that made you feel connected to me." "This is real," Caroline said firmly. "What I feel for you is real, Josiah. I know it in my bones." Josiah cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly, a kiss full of promise and hope. When they pulled apart, they were both grinning like fools. They arrived in Santa Fe in the late afternoon, the city bustling with activity. Josiah led them directly to the boarding house that Caroline's aunt owned, a neat two-story building on a quiet street. Caroline's aunt, Margaret, was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes, and her niece's dark hair streaked with gray. She had been worried sick when the stagecoach arrived without Caroline and immediately pulled her niece into a fierce hug. "Thank God you are safe," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "When they told me about the attack, I feared the worst." Caroline introduced Josiah and explained how he had rescued her. Margaret looked at the young cowboy with assessing eyes, noting the way he looked at Caroline, the way her niece stayed close to his side. "You have my eternal gratitude, Mr. Webb," Margaret said warmly. "Please come in. You must stay for supper at the very least. I insist." Over a meal of roast chicken and vegetables, Caroline told her aunt an edited version of what had happened, leaving out some of the more frightening details. Josiah filled in information about the gang that had attacked the stage, promising to report everything to the local law enforcement. Margaret listened intently, occasionally reaching over to pat Caroline's hand reassuringly. As the evening wore on, Josiah reluctantly said he needed to get home to the ranch. "My family will be wondering where I am," he explained. He turned to Caroline. "May I call on you tomorrow?" "I would be disappointed if you did not," Caroline replied. Margaret walked them to the door to give them a moment of privacy. Josiah took both of Caroline's hands in his. "I am already counting the hours until I see you again." "Josiah," Caroline said softly, "thank you for everything. For saving me, for protecting me, for seeing me. You are easy to see, Caroline Mitchell. You shine." After Josiah left, Margaret gave her niece a knowing look. "That young man is smitten with you," Caroline blushed. "Is it that obvious, my dear girl? He looks at you like you hung the moon." "And unless I am much mistaken, you feel the same way about him." Caroline nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Is it crazy, Aunt Margaret, to have such strong feelings for someone I have known for such a short time?" Margaret smiled. "I met my late husband on a Monday and knew by Wednesday that I would marry him. When you know, you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I think," Caroline said slowly, "I am going to let myself fall completely in love with him." True to his word, Josiah arrived at the boarding house the next morning. He had cleaned up, shaved, and was wearing clothes that did not have trail dust ground into them. Caroline thought he looked impossibly handsome. He brought flowers for Margaret and a shy smile for Caroline. "I thought I could show you around Santa Fe," Josiah offered, "if your aunt can spare you." Margaret shooed them out the door with an indulgent smile. Josiah and Caroline spent the day exploring the city, walking through the plaza, visiting the shops, talking to everyone they met. Josiah introduced Caroline to several merchants he knew, and she was struck by how respected he seemed to be. People greeted him warmly and treated him with genuine fondness. "You know so many people," Caroline observed as they sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the afternoon activity. "Small community," Josiah explained. "Most of the ranchers and farmers around here have been working this land for generations. We all depend on each other to some degree." Over the next 2 weeks, Josiah called on Caroline every day. Sometimes they went riding, with Caroline learning to handle a gentle mare that Josiah borrowed from a friend. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch of the boarding house and talked for hours. Margaret observed it all with approval, often inviting Josiah to stay for meals. One evening, Josiah arrived looking nervous. He asked if he could speak to Margaret privately, and Caroline waited anxiously in the parlor while they talked in the kitchen. When they emerged, Margaret was smiling broadly, and Josiah looked relieved. "Your aunt has given me permission to invite you to the ranch," Josiah said. "To meet my family. They want to meet the woman who has captured my attention so completely." Caroline felt a flutter of nervousness. "When, this Sunday, we would make a day of it. I could pick you up in the morning, we would have dinner with the family, and I would have you back by evening. My mother is very eager to meet you." The following Sunday, Caroline dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes. Josiah arrived with a small wagon rather than on horseback, explaining that it would be more comfortable for the journey. The ride to the Webb Ranch took about 2 hours, and Caroline used the time to memorize everything about the landscape, knowing this might be her future home if things progressed as she hoped. The ranch itself was larger than Caroline had expected, with a sprawling main house, several barns and outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses and cattle. Josiah's mother, Martha Webb, came out to greet them before they even climbed down from the wagon. She was a handsome woman with gray-streaked blonde hair and the same kind eyes as her son. "So you are Caroline," Martha said warmly, pulling her into a hug. "Josiah has talked about nothing but you for 2 weeks. I was beginning to think he had invented you." Caroline laughed, instantly liking this woman. "I am very real, Mrs. Webb. Martha, please, come inside. Everyone is dying to meet you." Inside, Caroline met Daniel and his wife Ruth, who was heavily pregnant with their 3rd child. Their children, 5-year-old Thomas and 3-year-old Sarah, were shy at first but soon warmed up to Caroline when she sat on the floor to play with them. Emma, Josiah's sister, was exactly as he had described, full of life and opinions and immediate in her affection. "It is about time my brother found someone," Emma declared, linking her arm through Caroline's. "He has been moping around being noble and lonely for far too long." Dinner was a boisterous affair with everyone talking over each other, sharing stories and laughter. Caroline felt immediately welcomed, included in the family dynamic as if she had always been part of it. She helped Ruth set the table, listened to Martha's stories about Josiah as a child, and endured Emma's enthusiastic interrogation about her life in St. Louis. After the meal, Josiah took Caroline on a tour of the ranch. They walked through the barns, visited the horses, and climbed a small hill that overlooked the entire property. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I love them," Caroline said simply. "Your family, they are wonderful." Josiah took her hand. "They love you too. My mother told me before dinner that you are perfect for me. Emma said if I do not marry you, she will disown me as her brother." Caroline laughed, then sobered. "Josiah, we should probably talk about the future. About what we both want." "I want you," Josiah said simply. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. I want children with you, a family, a future. I want everything, Caroline, with you." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "I want all of that too, but we have only known each other for a few weeks. Is that enough time to be sure?" Josiah turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I was sure the night you whispered my name in your sleep. I was sure when I decided I would never leave your side again. Time does not matter when it comes to the heart, Caroline. I love you. I am completely, utterly, irrevocably in love with you." "I love you too," Caroline whispered. "So much it scares me." Josiah pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his emotion into it. When they broke apart, they were both breathless and grinning. "Marry me," Josiah said. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care. Marry me, Caroline." "Yes," Caroline said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They returned to the house to share the news, and the Webb family erupted in celebration. Martha cried happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding. Emma hugged Caroline so hard she could barely breathe. Daniel shook Josiah's hand with a proud smile, and even the children seemed to understand that something wonderful had happened. As they drove back to Santa Fe that evening, Caroline leaned against Josiah's shoulder, feeling more content than she had ever felt in her life. How did I get so lucky? She wondered aloud. We both got lucky, Josiah corrected. You stumbled into my camp and my whole world changed. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Santa Fe. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony while Martha held her hand. Emma served as Caroline's bridesmaid, and Daniel stood up as Josiah's best man. The church was packed with ranchers, townspeople, and friends, all of whom had come to celebrate the young couple who had found love in the most unexpected circumstances. Caroline wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with lace borrowed from Martha and a veil that had belonged to Ruth. When Josiah saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. Caroline thought she had never seen him look more handsome than he did at that moment, standing at the altar in his best suit, his love written plainly on his face. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Josiah kissed Caroline with such tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the boarding house, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed half the city. There was music and dancing, toasts and laughter. As Caroline danced with her new husband under the stars, she thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had left St. Louis broken and grieving, running toward an uncertain future. And then she had stumbled into Josiah's camp, whispered his name in her sleep, and found her home. "What are you thinking about?" Josiah asked, his arms around her waist as they swayed to the music. "About fate," Caroline said. "About how everything had to happen exactly as it did to bring me to you." "I think about that too," Josiah admitted. "If the stage had not been attacked, if you had run in a different direction, if I had camped somewhere else that night, any of those things could have changed everything." "But they did not," Caroline said firmly. "I found you or you found me. Either way, we found each other." Josiah kissed her forehead. "And I am never letting you go." They spent their wedding night at the ranch in a room that Martha had prepared for them, filling it with wildflowers and fresh linens. Josiah carried Caroline over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. As they lay together later, wrapped in each other's arms, Caroline felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. "I love you, Mrs. Webb," Josiah whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Mr. Webb, always." Life on the ranch suited Caroline better than she had dared to hope. She threw herself into learning everything about ranching, helping Martha with the household, cooking for the hands during busy seasons, and even learning to ride well enough to help with moving cattle. Martha became not just a mother-in-law but a true friend, teaching Caroline about the land and the life. Emma visited often, usually bringing gossip from town and presents for Caroline. Ruth and Caroline grew close as well, especially after Ruth gave birth to another boy that winter. Caroline was there for the delivery, helping Martha, and holding the baby afterward with a feeling of longing she could not quite hide. Josiah noticed, of course. He noticed everything about his wife. "We will have children when the time is right," he assured her that night as they lay in bed. There is no rush. But the time came sooner than they expected. That spring, Caroline realized she was pregnant. She told Josiah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same spot where he had proposed. Josiah's face went through a series of expressions, shock, joy, wonder, before he let out a whoop of happiness and pulled her into his arms. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "Caroline, we are having a baby." Martha was overjoyed at the news, immediately beginning to knit blankets and sew tiny clothes. Emma declared she would be the best aunt ever. Daniel joked that the ranch would be overrun with children soon. Even the ranch hands seemed pleased, offering congratulations and tips based on their own experiences. The pregnancy was not easy. Caroline suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and as summer arrived, the heat made her uncomfortable and swollen. But Josiah was attentive and patient, bringing her cool water, rubbing her feet, reading to her in the evenings. He treated her like she was made of glass, much to Caroline's amusement. "I am not going to break," she told him one afternoon when he refused to let her help hang laundry. "You are carrying our child," Josiah said stubbornly. "You should rest. The baby is not due for 3 more months. I need to stay active." They compromised, with Caroline doing lighter tasks and Josiah hovering nearby to help. As her belly grew, so did Josiah's excitement. He would talk to the baby every night, telling it about the ranch, about the horses, about how loved it already was. Caroline would run her fingers through his hair as he spoke, overwhelmed with love for this man who had become her entire world. The baby came in late October after a long and difficult labor. Martha and Ruth were there, guiding Caroline through it, while Josiah paced outside with Daniel, nearly wearing a hole in the porch. When the baby's first cry rang out, Josiah burst into the room, not caring about propriety. "A boy," Martha announced, handing the cleaned and wrapped infant to Caroline. "A healthy, strong boy." Josiah sat on the bed next to his wife, looking down at their son with wonder. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already making unhappy noises about being removed from his warm home. "He is perfect," Josiah breathed. "Caroline, he is perfect." They named him William after Caroline's father. Little William turned out to have his father's temperament, easygoing and content unless he was hungry. Josiah proved to be a devoted father, getting up with Caroline for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son in amazement. "I never knew I could love anything this much," Josiah told Caroline one night as they watched William sleep in his cradle. "Except for you." Caroline leaned into her husband's embrace. "We made him together, this perfect little person. It is the greatest thing I have ever done." The years that followed were full and happy. When William was 2, Caroline gave birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Grace, who kept everyone on their toes with their energy and mischief. 3 years after that, another son arrived, James, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings. The ranch prospered under Daniel and Josiah's management. They expanded their herd, bought more land, and built a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Josiah proved to have a gift for breeding horses as well, developing a line of tough, intelligent animals that were perfect for ranch work. Caroline found her own place in the community. She helped Margaret at the boarding house when needed, taught Sunday school at the church, and became known for her kindness and generosity. People said that Josiah Webb had gotten lucky the day Caroline Mitchell stumbled into his camp, but Caroline knew the truth. They had both gotten lucky. They had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Emma eventually married a doctor who moved to Santa Fe, and they had 4 children who were constant playmates with Caroline and Josiah's brood. Daniel and Ruth's family grew as well, until the ranch was full of cousins running wild and learning the land. Martha lived to see all her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, content in the knowledge that her family was strong and happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Josiah took Caroline back to the place where they had first met, the spot in the desert where his camp had been that fateful night. They left the children with Emma for the night and rode out together as the sun set. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if things had happened differently?" Caroline asked as they sat by a campfire, just like that first night. "Every day," Josiah admitted. "And every day I am grateful that fate or providence or whatever you want to call it brought you to me." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the simple gold band she wore. "You whispered my name in your sleep and it changed everything." "You could have ignored it," Caroline pointed out. "You could have chalked it up to a dream and left me in Santa Fe, gone back to your life." Josiah shook his head firmly. "I knew that night I would never leave your side again, and I have not. I have kept that promise, Caroline. Every day for 10 years I have chosen you, and I will choose you every day for the rest of our lives." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "I choose you too." "Always?" They made love under the stars that night, tender and passionate, reaffirming their commitment to each other. As they lay wrapped in blankets afterward, Josiah told Caroline about his plans for the ranch, his dreams for their children's futures. Caroline shared her own hopes and ideas, her desire to maybe start a school on the ranch for the local children who lived too far from town. "We could do that," Josiah said thoughtfully. "Convert one of the old barns, hire a teacher. Emma's husband could help set it up. I love that idea, Caroline." As the night deepened, Caroline found herself thinking about the younger version of herself who had stumbled into this very spot, terrified and alone. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, more than all right. That girl had no idea the happiness waiting for her, the love that would define her life, the family she would build. "What are you thinking about now?" Josiah asked sleepily. "About beginnings," Caroline said, "and about how the worst night of my life led to the best life I could have imagined." Josiah pulled her closer. "Our story is a good one, the best," Caroline agreed. More years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their children. William grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the land as much as his father did. He took naturally to ranching and eventually married a girl from town, bringing her to live on the ranch in a house they built together. Elizabeth became a teacher, fulfilling Caroline's dream in her own way, while Grace showed a talent for training horses that rivaled her father's. James, the quiet one, surprised everyone by developing a love for numbers and business, managing the ranch's finances with impressive skill. As Josiah and Caroline aged, they did so together, their love deepening with each passing year. When Josiah's hair turned gray, Caroline told him he looked distinguished. When Caroline worried about the lines on her face, Josiah kissed each one and told her they were proof of a life well lived, of smiles and laughter and love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had married. Josiah's hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring back on Caroline's finger, his voice thick with emotion as he repeated the promises he had first made 3 decades earlier. "I promise to love you, to stand by you, to choose you every single day," he said, looking into Caroline's eyes. "You are my heart, Caroline, you always have been." Caroline's own voice was steady despite her tears. "And you are mine, Josiah. From the moment I whispered your name in my sleep, you became part of my soul. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." The celebration that followed was joyous, with music and dancing and stories told late into the night. Their grandchildren begged to hear the story of how they met, a tale they had heard dozens of times but never tired of. Josiah and Caroline told it together, each adding details the other forgot, finishing each other's sentences the way they had learned to do over the years. "And when Grandma whispered my name," Josiah said, his arm around Caroline's shoulders, "I knew I would never leave her side again." "And he has not," Caroline added, smiling up at her husband, "not for a single day." "That is so romantic," Elizabeth sighed while Grace rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "It is true," William said firmly. "I have never seen two people more devoted to each other." As the party wound down and people began to leave, Josiah and Caroline found themselves alone on the porch of the ranch house, the place where they had shared so many evenings over the years. The stars were bright overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together. 30 years, Caroline marveled. How did it go by so fast? "Every minute with you has been a gift," Josiah said. "Even the hard times, we faced them together and that made all the difference." Caroline thought about the droughts they had weathered, the cattle they had lost, the illnesses they had nursed each other through, the heartbreak of Martha's death and later Daniel's. She thought about the joys too, the births of children and grandchildren, the successes of the ranch, the simple pleasure of waking up next to the man she loved every single day. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "The speed of it all, how quickly we married." Josiah turned to look at her, his eyes still as warm and loving as they had been that first night. "Not for a single second," You are the best decision I ever made, Caroline Webb, the only one that really mattered." They sat together as the night deepened, holding hands and watching the stars, content in the life they had built and the love that had sustained them through it all. The years continued their inevitable march forward, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch remained prosperous, now a joint effort involving 3 generations of Webbs. Josiah and Caroline moved into a smaller house on the property as they aged, leaving the main house to William and his growing family, but they remained active and involved in the daily life of the ranch. When Caroline fell ill with pneumonia at the age of 68, Josiah never left her side, sitting by her bed and holding her hand through fever dreams and difficult breathing. He talked to her constantly, reminding her of their adventures together, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them for more than 40 years. "You have to fight," he whispered fiercely. "I am not ready to lose you, Caroline. I will never be ready." And Caroline did fight, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she had. When she finally recovered, weak but alive, Josiah cried for the first time in decades, burying his face in her shoulder and thanking God for sparing her. "You cannot leave me yet," he told her. "We still have more story to live." Caroline's recovery was slow, but with Josiah's constant care and devotion, she regained her strength. The illness had scared them both, making them more aware of their mortality, but it also made them more grateful for each day they had together. On Caroline's 70th birthday, the entire extended Webb family gathered for a celebration that lasted an entire weekend. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the ranch, their laughter and energy a testament to the legacy that Josiah and Caroline had created. There were games and contests, enormous meals and late-night conversations, and a joy that permeated everything. As the celebration wound down and the last of the family members prepared to leave, William approached his parents with an envelope. "We all went in together," he explained, "to give you something we thought you would appreciate." Inside the envelope were 2 train tickets to St. Louis and back. "We thought you might want to visit the city where you grew up, Mom, see how it has changed. Emma and I have made all the arrangements. Everything is taken care of here. You two can just enjoy the trip." Caroline was speechless, tears streaming down her face. She had not been back to St. Louis since she left all those years ago. Josiah looked at his wife, seeing the emotion in her eyes, and nodded. "We will go. And Caroline, we will visit your parents' graves. Pay our respects." The trip to St. Louis was bittersweet. The city had changed dramatically, grown larger and busier, barely recognizable from Caroline's memories. But they found the cemetery where her parents were buried, cleaned the headstones, and left flowers. Caroline cried as she told her parents about her life, about Josiah, about the family she had built. Josiah stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "They would be proud of you," Josiah said as they walked away from the graves. "So proud of the woman you became, the life you have lived." "I hope so," Caroline said softly. "I hope they know I was happy, that I found love and built a family and lived a good life." "They know," Josiah assured her. "Wherever they are, they know." They returned to New Mexico with renewed appreciation for the life they had built. The ranch was home in a way St. Louis had never been, and they were grateful for every aspect of it. As they settled back into their routines, they also made a point of spending more time together, taking evening walks, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset, making the most of every moment. One evening, as they sat in their usual spot, Caroline suddenly said, "Tell me about that night again." "The night we met." Josiah smiled, knowing exactly why she wanted to hear it. They were getting older, their memories not as sharp as they once were, and she wanted to cement this story in both their minds. "You came stumbling out of the darkness," he began, his voice soft and remembering. "Covered in blood and dust, terrified but still fighting. You asked for help and then you collapsed. I caught you before you hit the ground." "And then I slept," Caroline prompted. "And then you slept. I sat across the fire from you, keeping watch, making sure you were safe." And then, just before dawn, you said my name. Josiah paused, his voice thickening with emotion. You said it so softly, so tenderly, like I was someone precious, and in that moment I knew. Knew what? That you were meant to be mine. That I would spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, being whatever you needed me to be. I decided right then that I would never leave your side again, and I have not. Caroline reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Best decision you ever made. Best decision we ever made, Josiah corrected. You decided to trust me. You decided to let me court you. You decided to marry me. We built this life together, Caroline. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Then Caroline said, I am glad I whispered your name that night. I am glad you heard me. I am glad for all of it, every single moment, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. They made the good parts that much sweeter. Josiah and Caroline lived well into their 80s, longer than most in their generation. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, saw the ranch continue to prosper under the guidance of their descendants, and took satisfaction in knowing that the legacy they had built would continue long after they were gone. When Josiah finally passed away at the age of 86, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Caroline beside him holding his hand. His last words to her, spoken just hours before, were, I have loved you every single day, Caroline, every single day. Caroline mourned deeply, but not bitterly. She had had 57 years with the love of her life, which was more than most people got. The entire community came to the funeral, a testament to the respect and love that Josiah had earned over his lifetime. Caroline stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, knowing that Josiah would have been proud of her courage. She lived another 2 years without him, years filled with family and memories and quiet contentment. She spent her time with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their great-grandfather, making sure they knew about the man he had been and the love they had shared. When Caroline's time came, she was ready. She passed away in the same bed where Josiah had died, surrounded by family, her hand held by William. Her last words were a whisper, almost inaudible, but William heard them clearly. Josiah. They buried Caroline next to her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place where Josiah had once proposed and where they had celebrated their 10th anniversary. The headstones were simple but perfect. Josiah Webb, 1858 to 1944. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he chose love every day. Caroline Mitchell Webb, 1861 to 1946. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She whispered his name and he never left her side. The ranch continued to thrive, generation after generation, the story of Josiah and Caroline becoming legend. Every Webb child grew up hearing about how their ancestors met, about the whispered name in the night and the cowboy who stayed. It became a family touchstone, a reminder of what true love looked like, of the power of commitment and devotion. Years later, long after the last person who had known them personally had passed away, the story still persisted. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, used as an example of what was possible when two people chose each other completely. The ranch itself became known as Webb's legacy, famous not just for its cattle and horses but for the love story at its foundation. And on quiet nights when the wind blew across the New Mexico desert, people swore they could sometimes hear it, faint as a dream carried on the breeze. A woman's voice, soft and tender, whispering a name. And if you listened closely, you could hear the answer, a man's voice, low and certain, promising never to leave her side. The echo of a love that had transcended time, proving that some promises really do last forever. The story of Caroline and Josiah Webb had become more than just history. It had become hope itself, a reminder that love could find you in the darkest moments, that one whispered name could change everything, that the right person would stay by your side through whatever came. And that was a legacy worth more than all the land and cattle in the world.